Hi, welcome to the first video of a character creation. So for this first series of videos, I thought that to start with something a little bit easy. So for people that want to follow along or what I'm doing, it won't be too hard to try and replicate. So as a character that I quite like, I'm a big fan, like many people, I'm a big fan of the Disney Pixar movies. And I thought, maybe we can make a character from the movie The Incredibles, in particular Mr. Incredible. Mr. Incredible is a very nice design character. I have a bunch of references here. So Mr. Incredible is a very well designed character. He has very defined, exaggerated hero proportions, and I think it would be fun to make this character, and I'm gonna show you the whole process from start to finish. I've taken a bunch of screen grabs from the movie, and as you can see here, a bunch of screen grabs in different angles of his face, different angles, different lighting conditions, and as you can see, he has very defined facial features. As you can see, his profile is very specific. It's almost like those Spartans helmets. This kind of sharp nose, the shape here. Broad chin, you can see. So yeah, I think this is gonna be a good character to start with, and so I hope you will enjoy this series of videos, and let's get started. Oh, by the way, if you're wondering, this image viewer that I'm using, it's called XNView. It's pretty old, but I think it was free. I'm not sure about now, but this version, I installed it many years ago, and it was free. It's a pretty straightforward, very simple to use image browser, and yeah, so check it out if you want, and let's get started. Okay, so here we are. Now, for the majority of the creation process, at least the modeling part, defining the proportions and shapes, I will be using this software called ZBrush or ZBrush, depending on how do you spell it. This is widely used from many artists all around the world. It's very famous software, and I will be using this to create the character. Now, I will also show and explain some of the function of the software, so for the people that are not familiar with, I will try to cover as much as possible, but this is not intended to be like a ZBrush course or anything like that. I'll just try to explain what I'm doing and hopefully you will learn some of the functionality of this tool, which is definitely one of the best. I really like this software. So let's get started. What we can do first of all is define an overall volume for our character. So if I go here to this panel, this is where a bunch of primitives can be selected, and I'm gonna start with this called zSphere. So what this is, it's a special tool that will allow me to create volumes, and then after I created those volumes I can convert them into polygons and started sculpting it. But I will talk more about it when I do it. After I drop my tool, I click this icon, which is edit. This will allow me to start editing this zSphere. So as you can see, when I move the mouse on the sphere, the active area, it's shown to follow along the surface. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to activate the symmetry. So we're going to sculpt this character symmetrically first. This is going to be a little bit easier, so we don't have to do things twice. Pretty handy option that. So to activate symmetry, I'm going to press the letter X on the keyboard. And now as you can see, when I move the mouse, I have symmetry active. I accidentally clicked that. Now let's start by creating the main volume. So to help us in this process, it's always good to take a look at the pictures, the references. So let's go back and let's see what we can actually do. So you can see the character physique. Let's open this image. Now, one cool thing that ZBrush can do, if I go up here, you see it says see through. If I move this slider, the whole software interface become transparent, and I can still operate, as you can see, but I can also see through what the window that is below this. If I move the mouse on the top, the interface become opaque again, so I can select all the options, and then when I move the mouse in the center like this, it becomes half transparent again, based on what I've decided on this slider. I can make it more transparent or less transparent. So for now, I'm just gonna use this image here as a rough reference. So let's say that we want to have this main sphere as the waist from where we are going to extract the rest of the character. So if I click and drag here, actually before I do this, you can see that at the moment this red circle around my cursor, this is my influence area. So when I work with this sphere, it's always I always prefer to have a very small influence area. And so to do this, I'm gonna press the letter S on my keyboard, and I'm gonna drag this down to 1. So basically I only have 1 point that I can influence. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna click and drag, And if I press W or click on the move, I can click and move my extruded spheres like this. Scale does what you would expect. It will scale up and down. I can also do the same for this main sphere like that. And rotate will rotate the limbs like this. So now let's go back to draw. I can also insert at any point. I can insert new spheres and move them around like this. So this is a very cool and neat way to create volumes. So now let me undo this and let's start again. So I'm gonna move his legs down like that. Maybe, let's see, I'm gonna scale this down a little bit. So what I want to do at the moment is just to create some base proportion and volume, and you can see I can move and scale the zSpheres that I've created like this. I'm gonna move them back. Let's see. Something like that. I'm just clicking the mouse and dragging it around. So what we want to do is to have something that we can expand for his legs. Now obviously this picture that we're using, it's not symmetrical, it's not from the front, so we don't need to be super precise at this stage, but let's just use this as a reference like that. We will obviously refine the character later, so let's add a new sphere and move it down. Now let's scale this down. It has very thin ankles. Now we can add maybe one here and scale it up to create a little bit more volume for the calves and something like that. Again, I'm not worried at this time about I'm not worried at this time about the exact proportion. This is just to have something that we can start with. So let's move something like here. Let's bring the knee here, something like that. And so we are going to sculpt this character in a, it's called a T pose or a pose. So let you understand what I'm talking about. T pose is this. This is the body looks like a T, a letter T. This is a T pose. This is commonly used because it's easy to model and then put the skeleton inside for the animations. So we're gonna do something like this. So I don't know, this image, it's pretty nice, but it's not official. This has been made by some other artists, but it's good to take a look what other people have done. It helps for the proportions, as you can see. But I will prefer to start using the actual images from the movie, which are the one that we are going to look at the moment. So let's go back to our character here, and let's continue. So for the feet, we are going to click on draw and extrude another sphere, and then we're going to extrude another small sphere here, and maybe move it forward a little bit, something like that. And again, I'm not worried at this point about matching the exact fit shape. I just want something to have a little bit of volume, and I will refine that later. Now let's move up. Let's create. As you can see, when I move towards the center, the cursor snaps this because I have symmetry active, and it snaps in the middle, so I don't have to worry about being super precise. The software will take care of that for me. So again, click and drag, and then I'm going to let's see, scale it up like that, and then make another one like so. Let's bring this guy here, so it's going to be about, this is going to be the belly, like that. It obviously needs more volume, so we can scale this up, but again, we will take care of that more precisely later on. For now, let's add a little bit of volume like this, and place it roughly when it's supposed to be. And now let's add the shoulder. Let's move them down like this a little bit. So he has very broad shoulder, a very heroic, stereotypical heroic figure, and kind of like that. Let's continue by adding arms like that. We're gonna extrude his big arms. Now again, I want to sculpt this character in a T pose or a pose. The A pose is just with the arms a little bit towards down compared to T pose, but so let's do now, just to have an idea of the proportions. Let's see if let's keep this pose right now, and then we're gonna move it later. So broader shoulders, something like this, right? And then we can just add what will become the hand, like that, something like this, just to have an idea what this character can look like. Now maybe let's see, perhaps the legs are a little bit too short, so what we can do, just click on move and move this guy down a little bit, something like that, maybe a little bit, even a little bit more, but again, we will change the proportions later on, refine them. Now I just want something that vaguely resembles his body shapes, but as you can see, if I move this around, the legs still look a little bit small, so if I click between two spheres, so in the connections line here, if I click and drag, this will scale the whole chain of spheres like this, as opposite of scaling just the sphere here. So I can do this and scale the whole chain. This looks a little bit better in terms of overall proportions. And now let's add the neck, something like this. He has a very, very big neck and head. And then for the head, for now we're just gonna add a sphere, like so. Let's see. Let's do for now something like this. I just want to have some volume. So let's increase this like that. And for now, just let's do something like this. We will. It looks strange at the moment, but it will look fine. So, as you might notice, this part and this part became semi-transparent. This is just the software telling you that these two zSpheres, they're penetrating a little bit too much, but we don't care. I mean, we can move this out, like here you can see they will look normal now, but we don't really care at this stage, and I'll show you why in a second. So let's go back to our character here. So I think I made it, the head, way too big. Let's move this down and let's scale this down like so. Let's see, if I move the character here, it's still too big, so move it down like that, and maybe even a little bit more, maybe something like that. And we will scale down the tip of the head. As you can see, he has the top of the head, it's very small compared to the neck and chin. We will make sure that we will get the proportions right. So I think this is a decent start. So let's see. Now, obviously, at the moment this looks funny and looks weird, but it will look just fine. Don't worry about it. Now, as I said before, I want to sculpt this character in a pose. So I'm gonna click on rotate and just rotate his limbs around like this, like that, and maybe just move this a little bit more, like so. Okay, we will later cycle through the images that I've grabbed from the Blu-ray and see if we can find something that resemble a little bit more this pose. But for now, this will do. Okay, now let's save what we have done so far. So let's click on Save As. and we're gonna go to a folder, and let's create a new folder. Actually, I already have a Mr. Incredible folder here, so let's use that. And let's create a folder called ZBrush. And this is going to be, let's call this Mr. Incredible 001. We will save incrementally. So save. So ZBrush also has a quick save feature up here. If I click this button, you see that for a split of a second something came out. And if I go here to the lightbox and move to quick save, you can see that our scene it's here. So if the program crashes or something bad happens, the quick save should bring back what we had. And it also quick saves automatically every 10 minutes or so, maybe less. Okay, so now what we're gonna do with this. So this is not particularly helpful on its own because we cannot sculpt the zSpheres, but what we can do, if we press the key button A, the letter A on the keyboard, this happens. Whoa, what's this? Now this looks like a mess, but I'm not gonna worry about it right now. Now what happens here if I go to Adaptive Skin tab, you see that this preview is highlighted. This is exactly the same as pressing the A key, as you can see. Actually, I do believe that the reason why the head become like this, it's because of this situation here. So let's see if I move this a little bit outside, what's gonna happen. Preview, yeah, that's so. For now, oops, I don't want to do that. For now, let's yeah. Okay, so yeah, it seems that it doesn't really like this situation. So one thing that I can do to make it better, I can scale this down like so, move it here, and then from here I can make another one and drop it like this. So, and scale it maybe a little bit. So, kind of like this. Again, it looks very weird. It looks very wrong, but don't worry about it. We will fix this soon. So yeah. So basically, what happens when you press the letter A or click preview? ZBrush will generate a mesh based on these zSpheres that we laid down, and this low poly mesh, we were going to subdivide this and sculpt this. As you can see, also it makes it. If I go here and click this button, draw polyframe, you see that all these colors are ID, are polygons ID, and these are created automatically because we have different spheres. As you can see, every group of spheres generate its own ID, which will come handy if we want to isolate specific areas or quick select features, but we will dive into that later. We don't need to use this at the moment. It's good to know that it's there. So also, one other thing that I want to point out is that ZBrush does a pretty good job at making the topology all quads, and the reason why you want to have quads as opposite of triangles, it's because when we are going to subdivide our mesh, if you have triangles, triangles tend to create pinches in the mesh, and those pinches are very hard to clean up. So that's why you want to have as much quads as possible, because when you subdivide your mesh, the quads will create a very smooth and clean surface. So let's go back. Actually, since we modified the head a little bit, let's just make sure that we resave this. Okay. Now, the next step here, this is only a preview, okay? It's not actually creating this geometry yet. So if we want to create this geometry, we're gonna click on Make Adaptive Skin. Let's create it. Now, nothing has changed here, but if we go into the Subtools panel, now we have our mesh. And if I click the A button, I can still switch between the two, but now ZBrush has created our mesh. Now this is a fully sculptable mesh. I can go to any brush, increase my size, and I can start sculpting on this, as you can see. So what we want to do now, obviously, this level of detail is way too low for us to be able to do anything with it, but it is important to never start with a particularly high poly count, because we need to go progressively from overall shapes and proportion, and then starting to add detail later on. You'd never start from the fine details, because you want to be sure that you have first the overall proportions right before diving into the details. Now, what I'd like to do when I work, I'd like to keep kind of like duplicates of my stages, just in case I want to go back. Obviously, ZBrush has a very good history that you can scrub back and forward, but it's always a good idea to keep a duplicated version of what we are doing. So this subtool panel here, now it's empty, it only has my model. What we're gonna do is click on duplicate, and so now you can see we have one new polygon mesh, and this is what we're gonna work on. So I'm gonna click here, and as you can see, if I'm going to, it looks that nothing happened here, but because the two meshes are identical and overlapping. However, if I, for example, go here and start moving this around, you can see that below, like the darker version is this one. So let's undo that. I'm gonna uncheck, if you click on the icons, will not display this model. So now if I move, as you can see, it's not displayed. You can see I can activate it. It's there, but it's just hidden. And so undo well, here. So let's start by creating a Dynamesh. Now, what is Dynamesh? So if I go here on geometry, there is this tab called Dynamesh. Dynamesh is, like the name suggests, a dynamically generated mesh. And what I mean by that, I will show you in a second. So if I click on Dynamesh right now, let's see what happens. First of all, it says that the mesh has multiple subdivision level. Let's click no. I don't want to keep them. Now, you might have noticed something have changed here a little bit. The mesh is not, it looks a little bit different, does it? And that's because what actually happened, if I go here and show the polygons, this what happened. Let me just undo to show you what happened here. So this is the initial polygon mesh, and if I do Dynamesh again, no, this is how it becomes. So what Dynamesh does, basically, it generates automatically a finer mesh that traces, that resembles your previous mesh. And what that allows you to do is to have a uniform distribution of polygon across your mesh. Why do I want a uniform distribution? Well, by clicking Control D, if I start subdividing this guy, you can see it becomes smooth, right? And you can see the subdivision level going up. I can scrub this and go back to my lowest subdivision, go higher, or I can press Shift D, that does the same thing, or D to go up. But what happens is that if you notice, if I go to the lowest subdivision polygons, the size of this square here, it's much smaller than the size of this square. So what happens is that when I subdivide my mesh and then I want to sculpt some fine detail, let me zoom here. Let's say I'm start to sculpting something. You can see that I have a pretty decent detail here, but if I do the same thing here, you see how the detail is much lower, okay, even if the brush size is exactly the same. And that's because the density of the polygons here is much higher than the density of the polygons here, and you don't want that. So let's undo this. So let's go back to level 2 and delete the previous subdivision for now. So when I click on Dynamesh, let's click no. When I click on Dynamesh, as you can see that everywhere the size of the square, it's pretty much the same. It's you see, everywhere it's the same size. So if I subdivide this and I sculpt here, I get nice detail as well. And if I sculpt here and I get the same nice detail. This is a very important step. Now, why, you're probably wondering, why does this mesh look like this? It's not very smooth, right? Well, the reason is because Dynamesh, when it's generated, it will try to adapt as best as possible to the mesh where it's generated from. So if I go back here, you can see the original mesh was this, right? So what you want to do before clicking on Dynamesh is to add some details, some smooth details like this, and then you click on Dynamesh. And again, click no, because we are not, at the moment, we are not interested in the subdivision at this stage. So now we have our equal size mesh, and our model is fairly smooth. Obviously, we will increase the detail of this mesh later on, but for now, this is a good size. It's a good detail from start, making like proportions and um, and overall shapes. Now, let me activate symmetry again, like this. So now, as you can see, if I start doing stuff, it will affect both sides. Now, for this first video, this was a very basics overview on how to get to a point where we have one sculptable base mesh. Obviously, it looks very odd, especially here, but from the next video, we will start sculpting and refining this mesh to make it look a little bit more like our Mr. Incredible characters. So I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.